Good morning. Good morning. All right.
I got 2 minutes. I don't know who said it, the speaker. The last time I said it, wasn't me this time.
Okay.
The Muslim Institute, so I think that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. All right.
Get the gong here. Dave, can I start? Good morning. Maybe I should move the microphone closer. Good morning. And happy St. Patty's Day to those who are celebrating that particular holiday. I see some green out there. Today I'm going to begin by sharing some announcements with you. I want to mention that in your order of service there's a QR code that can be scanned to pick up into all the announcements because there's a lot of things going on here at First Unitarian Church of Omaha. Also, there are hard copies available out in the vestibule out there. They're blue if you are interested in picking that up. I did want to point out a few things. First of all, welcome to our visitors. We are so glad to have you with us today. After the service, we always gather downstairs in our common room, and we invite you to join us. We do have a tray of blue coffee mugs that are designated for visitors. If you pick one of those up, we know you're a newcomer. We'll know to approach you and visit with you, and it's just a way to kind of get the door open to communicating and getting to know one. Also, don't forget if you parked in the parking garage to validate your parking ticket. The machine is downstairs towards the back of the common room. The flowers, thank you to Dee Ott for bringing the flowers today. And thank you to the Mindful Ones hospitality team who are serving us today by greeting and doing kitchen duty and all sorts of things around the church. Other than that, I'm not going to read all of the announcements because there really are a lot. My last announcement is to share with you that at 3 o'clock today, you're invited to join and stand and pray in solidarity with the Muslim community of Omaha at 3 o'clock to honor the 50 lives taken in the act of terror at the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. The vigil takes place at the American Muslim Institute, the AMI, just south of 132nd and Pacific. If you have questions about that, I encourage you to contact Mark Lustikoff. Where are you, Mark? Right there, if you have questions about that. All right, thank you so much.
Whoever you are, wherever you come from, wherever you find yourself on your life's journey, whether you've walked in or rolled in, whomever you love, you are welcome here. Come into this space, this sacred space, this sanctuary. Draw in its beauty as if drawing in a deep breath. And come into this space with hearts open, hearts ready to receive, hearts ready to give. Let us begin. Do we have any young people with us this morning? Would you like to come help light the chalice? Please rise and join me in the words found in your order of service. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Let us sing our first hymn, number 6. If any young people or young at heart people would like to come up and join me for the story for all ages, you're welcome to do so now. And Clyde, I guess Clyde's going to hang out with us too, right?
I'm young at heart.
Good morning, everyone. So I want to tell you a little bit about a man who lived a long time ago, and his name was John Newton. Have any of you heard his name before? You've heard the name Newton before, probably from a famous scientist, but this guy's not the scientist. He's somebody different. Here's a picture of him. I know you all can't see it, but you can see a man with a powdered wig and a robe. John Newton is a man who wrote a very famous hymn called Amazing Grace. But before he did that, when he was really young, when he was a boy and when he was a young man, he did some really bad things. He used to make fun of other people for their religion. He teased Christians all the time, and he used to trade slaves. That means he bought and sold humans, people. So he did some really horrible things. So do you think that means that it's all over from him and he's just going to be a bad person for his entire life? No, not necessarily, right? We all have the ability to change. John Newton did that. It took him a long time, and he changed a little bit at a time. But the first thing, one of the first things that happened to him was, remember how he made fun of all the other Christians? He became a Christian himself. Not only did he become a Christian himself, can you tell what he is by looking at his picture? He became a minister, right? See, we have matching robes. But I forgot my powdered wig. And you can see my stole, I like my stole a lot better than his. His is a plain little short white one. And I get to wear these beautiful stoles that people make out of quilts. So yes, he became a priest, and he wrote a hymn. And you know what else he did by the end of his life? He started working to free all of the slaves. So he started off trading slaves, but by the end of his life, he figured out what he was doing wrong, and he learned that that was a bad thing to be doing and how to become a better person. So I hope that you realize that all of us make mistakes, right? All of us do things that are wrong from time to time, even me, even Bella. Although Bella hardly ever. But that doesn't mean that we're always going to be that way. We have the ability to learn from the mistakes that we make and to grow and to change and to be and do better. So thank you for staying with us this morning and listening to my little story about John Newton. You can take his picture with you if you want to your class, and we'll sing you all out.
Our Heritage Minute this morning goes back 54 years. On March 17th of 1965, a federal court ruled that the march from Selma to Montgomery, led by Martin Luther King Jr. and many others, could proceed after attempts by Alabama authorities to stop it. Dr. King had put out a call to clergy from around the country to join in the march. Reverend Vester Vanstrom of this church and Reverend Charles Stephen of Lincoln Unitarian joined several hundred Unitarians, both clergy and laypersons, who had already answered the call of Dr. King. Several days earlier, on March 11th, UU minister James Reeb had been murdered by Klansmen. A few days later, on March 25th, Unitarian Universalist Viola Liuzzo from Michigan was also murdered by Klansmen at night on a Mississippi highway while driving several black citizens to register to vote. Reverend Vanstrom, a longtime friend of Reverend Reeb, was chosen as one of the eulogists at the funeral of Reverend James Reeb. Other eulogists included Dr. King. Many historians believe that these deaths contributed directly to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. An interesting sidelight to these events, at the time that Reverend Vanstrom was called to First Unitarian in 1964, the chair of the Minister Selection Committee, Gerald Metcalf, reported to the board that the team had narrowed the pool of candidates down to 3. After meeting all 3 candidates, hearing them preach at nearby churches, and after some deliberation, the committee offered our pulpit to Reverend Vanstrom. The chairman noted at the time that if Reverend Vanstrom had not accepted the offer, they would have offered the job to their second choice, Reverend James Reeb.
Please join me in time of meditation. Find a comfortable place in your seat. Place your feet flat on the floor so that you might feel grounded, more connected to the earth, which nourishes and sustains us all. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so, and take a deep breath in. We spend so much time running from ourselves, fleeing from what we know about the goodness in our hearts. We think we can escape the intelligence of our loving. Imagine you are standing before a bodhisattva, Jesus, Buddha, the First Mother. It does not matter what you call the Holy One. He has dust on his shoes, chafe clinging to her, the smells of being alive. Shining from their faces is the beam of all their questions, the compassion of their living. Can you see yourself through those eyes? Can we know each other like this? We, who no longer believe in messiahs, can hardly believe in each other. Can we know ourselves seen and know each other this same way until our restless hearts learn to abide in this knowing and this love? Can we live in this gaze of blessing? As we gather here together once again, so too do we gather our gifts of time and treasure. If you are new or visiting with us for the first time today, please allow the plate to pass you by. You are our guests. The morning's offering will now be gratefully received.
Oop. Okay, here we go. Good morning. Mary Kay asked me to come up and speak at this speak about stewardship today, and I'm so glad she did because it allows me to at least participate in something that does have meaning and resonance for me, which is obviously the theme of social justice. I wanted to, before I talk about stewardship, this is kind of a coincidence and maybe a fortuitous one. The reading that's coming next is a reading by Howard Thurman. Well, the church I went to in San Francisco was ministered by him. He was a great theologist, and he had formed this church, which was the first integrated church in San Francisco. And the man was so impressive. My mother was best friends with his daughter, so we actually did know him. But I was a little boy. He died relatively early, and I do remember once when he was preaching in to the congregation, which was always about social justice, but in a very elevated, esoteric kind of way. The man's voice was so deep that he sounded to me like the voice of God, and he had a charisma that was I don't think has been equaled, at least in my experience. So I just want to give a little context, if possible, to what's coming next. But in the meanwhile, I've been asked to talk about stewardship. And I was thinking this morning, I spent all week trying to write something that would be cogent and perhaps humorous, which I'm really not capable of. But I thought instead I'd just kind of try to speak from the heart. And one of the things is that I thought this morning, what is stewardship? So I looked it up, and theologically, stewardship is based on the belief that as human beings, we are responsible for the welfare of the world around us. And I think that's metaphorical to the idea of stewardship, because here we are in this absolutely beautiful environment, I think. And we have beautiful music that's we've just heard. We're going to hear the choir sing something I think that's going to be beautiful. I'm certainly looking forward to William's solo. And so most of my participation in this church has been through music, and I can say that I've gotten a lot of value out of it. However, churches don't run by music alone. They run by, unfortunately, the idea of money, and I guess this is what stewardship is about. So, in our pews, in the little pockets, there's a form which you may look at and deal with. But the fact is that out of a $270,000 goal, we've raised $118,000, and thank you for that. But we need to raise much more to be able to reach what we need to be able to operate this facility for the next year. So I encourage you to look in your pew and figure out what it is we all can individually do to support this church, our church environment. Thank you.
If I were to ask you what is the thing that you desire most in life this afternoon, you'd say a lot of things off the top of your head, most of which you wouldn't believe. But I think that if you were stripped to whatever there is in you that is literal and irreducible, and you tried to answer that question, it may be something like this. I want to feel that I'm thoroughly and completely understood, so that now and then I can take my guard down and look out around me and not feel that I will be destroyed with my defenses down. I want to feel completely vulnerable, completely naked, completely exposed, and absolutely secured. That I can run the risk of radical exposure and know that the eye that beholds my vulnerability will not step on me. That I can feel secure in my awareness of the active presence of my own idiom in me. So, as I live my life then, this is what I'm trying to fulfill, that I am secure because I hear the sound of the genuine in myself. And having learned to listen to that, I can become quiet, enough, still enough, to hear the sound of the genuine in you.
The sermon is gone. Oh my word. Did it fall down? Oh my gosh. Do you have it? No? Let's see if it got recycled. All right. Yeah. Down. One back down. Stay. Well, that was embarrassing. I apparently cleaned up the new script with the old script this morning, all at once. Yes, thank you. Hopefully that'll be the only one for a little while. I enter the trauma room and stand off to the side, watching. A young man, actually barely a man, lies before me on a stretcher. He is combative, fighting with the medical staff about having his pants taken off, demanding the 2 police officers in the room be removed, and refusing to give his name or any information about what happened to him. And I watch as he alternates between fighting and yelling with the staff and curling over on his side and crying about how much it hurts. He was found by police lying in a snowbank, a victim of assault. Not much is known yet, though he is clearly injured on one side. His appearance, young, male, ears and tongue pierced, arm tattooed, and his manner, refusing to give his name or story in front of the police, his anger and combativeness toward the medical staff, all give rise to a myriad of possible labels and stories, none of them flattering. Then he turns on his side once more, curls up into a ball, and cries about the pain. My heart breaks open. Part of me knows this young man could be a gangbanger, a person accustomed to being in trouble with the law, an innocent victim, or 1,000 other things. But none of that matters now. The possible labels and stories have all fallen away. All I can see now is a young boy crying in pain and in need of comfort. My heart has broken open. I move closer, encourage him to breathe, and rub his head in comfort. His chaplain is there. Someone who cares not just about his body and its broken condition, but about his feelings and his spirit, which have also been broken, is there. He has been seen, and his need for emotional comfort and spiritual healing has been acknowledged. A few years ago, I worked as a chaplain resident in an intensive clinical pastoral education program. The hospital where I served is a level 1 trauma center and contains the state's only burn unit. It is located in a city filled with violent crime and gang activity. Patients seen cover a wide range of diagnoses, from gunshot wounds and stabbings. One guy 3 times came in with a stab to his head, to appendicitis, cancer treatments and life-threatening burns, to dehydration or frostbite, and they cover all ages, from the not yet born to elders dying in hospice suites. The program itself is demanding, even at times grueling. Residents are there to learn how to do pastoral care in all of its forms well. Eventually, they move on to churches and synagogues, hospices and hospitals, wherever they are called and feel the call. Meanwhile, the most is made of their time in the program. Work weeks range from 60 to 64 hours, some shifts lasting as long as 28 hours at a time. Written work and assignments on top of that. So my aim in telling you all of this is to explain exactly how easy it would be to become jaded in such a setting. It takes a significant amount of dedication and commitment from anyone who chooses to do a residency, and I will admit there were times when I questioned my own levels of dedication and commitment, especially after a long and sleep-deprived night, and there were plenty of mistakes. But this night, and this patient I just spoke of, was not one of those times. Though I eventually found out his name and that he had been beaten by several guys who he is going to get someday, I never did get a chance to talk with him and find out who he really is and what his story is about. The next hour or so had been spent alternating between resisting staff and their attempts at medical care and allowing himself to be comforted and soothed by me. Eventually, he fell asleep from sheer exhaustion and for several hours. I did not see him again, though his presence remains with me still, for my heart had been broken open. I do not know how or why these moments of broken openness come and go, just that they do. I consider these moments of broken openness to be moments of seeing, of truly seeing, or essentially seeing, as Mark Nepo has termed it, or the sound of the genuine, as Howard Thurman has so eloquently described. I consider these moments of heartbroken openness to be moments of amazing grace. Amazing grace. There's a story behind the song, one which you have probably heard. It goes like this. John Newton was a slave trader who, after surviving a horrific storm, became suddenly racked with guilt about his chosen profession. Newton immediately turned his ship back to Africa, freed all his slaves, and as a newly converted Christian wrote the hymn, Amazing Grace. Now, as heartwarming as that story sounds, it is unlikely to be a story that Newton himself would recognize. That story is really the legend behind the song. It does not reflect the sound of the genuine John Newton. So today I'm going to tell you a different story about the same person, and one hopefully John Newton would better recognize. This one is a story about a young boy frequently in trouble for disobeying his father, who grew into a young man impressed in the British Navy, of a deserter who was caught, publicly stripped and beaten, then demoted to the lowest rank, of a slave trader brought back to life by slaves, sneaking him food from their own small allowance, of a slave trader locked up by his own master, who went without food, shelter, or clothing for many hours at a time, yet still continued to trade slaves after he was rescued. It is a story of a man who drank and swore too much, who derided Christians, who was disliked by his fellow crew, yet was saved by them when he nearly went overboard in a drunken stupor. It is a story of a man who twice, by two different captains on two different ships, avoided drowning when he was sent on a last-minute errand. It is a story of a man who got shot in the hat, lived through at least 2 tropical diseases, and 1 mutiny, and 3 slave revolts. It is also the story of a 23-year-old who converted to Christianity, yet continued to trade slaves, of a 39-year-old who became a priest, of a 47-year-old who wrote a hymn, of a 60-year-old who finally began to speak out against slavery and continued to do so for 22 more years. As you can see, John Newton's story is not a simple story, as no one's is, and it is not the story of a legend. John Newton's story is the story of a real life, of painfully slow growth and change and conversion. This John Newton story reflects the sound of the genuine in one former slave trader come priest. John Newton's story is a story of amazing grace. John Newton's story is a story of a heart broken open. Knowing this story, the longer, deeper, fuller, though still not complete story, brings richer and deeper meaning to the words of this famous hymn. Listen once more with eyes and ears and hearts open. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace which taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangerous toils and storms I have already come. 'Twas grace which brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When John Newton penned the words, "Through many dangerous toils and storms I have already come," he wasn't exaggerating, not by a long shot. Like all of us, his life was filled with its own dangers and challenges and near misses. His life was replete with its own tragedies and sorrows, as my life is, as your life is, as all of my patients' lives were. As Unitarian Universalists, it is from our lives, from our direct lived experiences, that we build our theologies and philosophies about what is sacred, about what is holy, about what gives lives meaning to our lives, and what our lives mean. This journey of meaning-making and discovery, and hopefully self-growth, is never-ending. William Ellery Channing, one of our early and most famous forebears, believes that this process, which he and other 19th century Unitarians term self-culture, continued even past death and into the afterlife. Either way, we all continue throughout our lives to make meaning and to discover anew, as did I during the time I spent working as a chaplain resident. Here are a few of the things I learned from that time. All of us, and any of us, can and do feel lonely and isolated at times, and it is not a matter of how many people we are surrounded by. Each of us, any of us, can get wrapped up in our own pain and suffering, and when this happens, we are often unable to see the loneliness and pain and suffering of others who surround us. I've often walked into a hospital room and discovered a person who is sitting or lying in isolation and loneliness and who is suffering, though the hospital is 430 beds full. And almost all of those beds, all of those people are experiencing some kind of pain or suffering, and each person feels alone. alone in the middle of 430 other people also feeling alone. And I dare say there may be people right here, probably are people right here sitting in this room amongst all of these people who feel lonely. It is as if each person is blind to the suffering of others and cannot see through their own pain. This is a natural phenomenon, inherent to the experience of being human, and it can easily happen to any of us when we are hurting deeply. So please hear me well. I do not mean any of this as a criticism of any person or even as a critique of the human condition. Rather, I see these moments as opportunities for grace, maybe even amazing grace. Grace, as a theological concept, traditionally refers to the grace of God. Though there are multiple definitions of exactly what grace is within Christianity, I like to explain it as a gift, neatly packaged and tied with a divine bow. Christians may or may not believe that grace is deserved, and they may differ on ideas about how grace is earned, or even if it is earned. But it seems that no matter what, and by anyone's definition, grace is always unexpected. When John Newton wrote Amazing Grace, he certainly was referring to a Christian concept of the divine grace of God. Today, though, I'd like to argue that there is such a thing as human grace, a grace that, like divine grace, may or may not be deserved, but is certainly always unexpected. I believe that each of us needs to be seen, heard, known, affirmed, and validated in our pain and our suffering. I believe this needs to happen whether we are lying in a hospital bed or sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning, whether we are gathering with friends or standing by the grave of a loved one. No one's pain is just like another's. Each person's pain is unique and must be seen for what it is. And when someone comes along and sees another's pain, sees its essential truth, and sees the person behind the pain, whether that someone is your chaplain or your minister, your friend, or even a stranger to you, you have been a recipient of grace, human grace, extended from one human to another, yet no less holy than any kind of divine grace. I believe that when we can essentially see the truth of another's life through their own eyes and hearts, then our hearts are broken open and our lives are filled with amazing grace. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.
It's all to
Let us all rise in body or spirit for our final hymn, which is Amazing Grace, number 205. With hearts open and with a love which knows no bounds, may your spirits be filled this day and all days with love and amazing grace. Amen. Ready? Leash. Leash.